She walked into court alone. No lawyer, no money, just a uniform that still smelled like bleach. Across the aisle sat the billionaire and his legal team, polished and bored, a velvet box on their table holding the stolen ring like proof wrapped in light. Defense? The judge asked. Silence. If you cannot proceed, this goes to remand in 20 minutes. 20 minutes to lose her job, her home, and her name. The prosecutor slid photos across. The ring on a velvet pad, a grainy camera frame, and a timestamp that glowed 10:42 p.m., but the clerk's log said the vault auto-locked at 10:30, and the night guard's entry badge had been used at 10:41 by someone who never signed the visitor sheet. The ring's weight in the report didn't match the catalog. Either 1 gram heavier, like a truth wearing a coat. The judge checked the clock. 19 minutes. Then the back door opened. A small figure in a school blazer stepped in, clutching a folder to her chest. Her voice didn't shake. Your Honor, I need to be heard. Before the courtroom clock began eating minutes, there was the house where the story learned to breathe. Mornings started with bleach and silence. The maid moved through glassy rooms with a cloth in her hand and a list in her head. Silver to polish, floors to mirror, a nursery to air, even though the child preferred the library now. The billionaire liked schedules. His mother liked control. Between the two of them, there wasn't much oxygen left for kindness. The ring lived in a velvet box inside a wall safe behind a painting. A family heirloom, museum insurance, a pebble the size of a small moon. Guests asked to see it. The matriarch liked to oblige. She'd hold it up so the chandelier could applaud. 3 days before court, the staff was called into the breakfast room. The painting was tilted. The safe was open. The velvet box lay empty like a mouth after a scream. Someone stole from this family, the matriarch said. Her voice was calm enough to be dangerous. Eyes traveled across uniforms the way storms travel across fields, looking for a place to land. The maid stared at the grain of the table and counted her breaths. Security pulled camera stills. In one frame, a figure passed the hall at 10:42. 2 p.m. Soft shape, little detail. In another, a door sensor recorded safe accessed. The timestamp glowed red. The matriarch put a hand to her chest, as if remembering how to faint. The billionaire didn't shout. He signed forms. HR took statements. The House Counsel suggested a quiet resolution. Return the ring, sign a letter, and keep your job. The maid said she hadn't taken anything. Then you'll need a lawyer, Counsel replied, like someone recommending a bakery. New details began to surface if anyone cared to look. The vault's autolock log said it relocked at 10:30. The camera that captured 10:42 had rebooted at 10:39 from a brief power flicker. The night guard's badge pinged an interior door at 10:41, but he swore he never left the gatehouse. An inventory note listed the ring at 6.2 Dutpeter, Hyder T. He'd poured to 2 grams. The evidence photo, when it finally circulated, showed a ring weighing 7.2. A gram isn't much unless you're measuring truth. In the kitchen, the maid scrubbed a copper pan until she could see a clean version of her face. The housekeeper whispered, "Don't sign anything you don't understand." The butler, who had been here since before the billionaire learned to tie a bow tie, set a teacup down too loudly and didn't apologize. People who live beside wealth develop tells, tiny rebellions inside perfect posture. The child noticed things adults mislabeled. She'd drawn a picture the night the power flickered, a rectangle with a circle inside, arrows toward a door, 6 dots like buttons, and the word Nana in the corner. It looked like an elevator panel, or a keypad, or a secret she wasn't sure how to name. She asked why the house hummed like a fridge at bedtime. The billionaire said generators are what rich houses do when the sky forgets itself. 2 days before court, a florist delivered lilies nobody had ordered. The matriarch took them anyway. She had a lacquered way of accepting what didn't belong to her. When she hugged the billionaire, her perfume hid the faint metal smell on her gloves. The maid kept working. Work is what people do when fear makes everything else sound expensive. She vacuumed the library rug and found a jewelry store receipt under the couch, folded small, dated the week before. Resize plus rhodium dip. A note on the margin, 1.0 G after mount change. Another gram. Another coat. That evening, a junior associate from the Billionaire's law firm visited the house. Polite smile, empty eyes. "Best for everyone if this stays quiet," he said. He asked the maid to initial a paper that sounded like forgiveness and read like confession. She set the pen down. "If I were guilty, you wouldn't need my signature," she said. The billionaire, standing by the fireplace with a tumbler of something amber, watched the flame. Silence is how powerful people pretend they're not making a choice. Police came. Not sirens, gloved hands and polite questions, the kind used in neighborhoods that donate to museum wings. The maid's room was small, neat, and poor in the way that embarrasses rich people because it doesn't ask them for anything. They searched a drawer, a bag, and a pocket, sewn back on by hand. They found nothing. Finding nothing doesn't make for interesting reports. On the security server, the camera that saw someone pass the hall at 10:42 also froze for 3 seconds as it clocked back in. The frame skip is where stories get rewritten. The maid didn't know that yet. She knew how to rinse a rag until the water stopped clouding. After the police left, the child sat at the kitchen island coloring a sunflower. The maid tied a garbage bag and smiled. The child pointed at the maid's hands. "Your gloves are the same color as the sun," she said. The matriarch snapped, "Don't touch the staff." The child's pencil stopped moving. Some lessons are taught in a single sentence. Others take a lifetime to unlearn. The House Counsel set a hearing date. "It's not criminal yet," he said, "but it will be if we can't resolve it." He sent a bundle of photos to a clerk the maid would never meet. The open safe, the empty box, the blurry silhouette, and the wait line nobody double-checked because rich paper looks correct even when it lies. The maid called 3 numbers somebody in the laundry had whispered onto a folded napkin. 2 rang forever. The third went to a clinic that sometimes knew legal aid interns who sometimes knew somebody with a suit. A young voice answered, promised to try, and asked for time the court wouldn't give. Time doesn't work the same for people without retainers. Meanwhile, a quiet intern in the billionaire's own building noticed a discrepancy he wasn't paid enough to mention. The power event log that night didn't match the generator's start record by 11 minutes. The building's elevator reported an unauthorized stop at a mezzanine that didn't exist on the floor plan. Small errors are often signatures. The matriarch visited the safe room twice the next day, once with a key, once without. She emerged both times without the ring, which you can't wear if you're pretending it's been stolen. A house camera caught her outline and filed it under movement detected. Machines are terrible poets. On the night before court, the maid stood in the staff corridor with a paper cup of tap water and a choice she didn't know how to name. The housekeeper squeezed her shoulder. "Truth takes the long way," she said. "Wear something that looks like the short way." The maid ironed her uniform and slept upright, as if afraid that lying down might look like surrender. Morning arrived, dressed like a verdict. The courtroom smelled of wood and rules. The billionaire's table gleamed. The maid's side had a chair and a pen on a chain. The judge checked the docket. The prosecutor spread exhibits like a picnic. A clock on the wall began a quiet, merciless count, and in the pocket of a school blazer that would not be admitted past security without a fuss, a child held a folder stuffed with drawings, a store receipt, a floor map copied in crayon, and a sentence she'd practiced in the mirror until it finally believed her voice. The clock ticked. The judge asked, "Defense?" Silence reached for the maid's throat. Then the back door opened. The bailiff stepped toward the back door, ready to turn the child away. "Minors don't address the court," he said. The judge didn't look up. "Name?" The girl held the folder tighter. I'm here for her." She tilted her chin toward the maid. "Please." The prosecutor sighed the way people do when they believe time belongs to them. "Your Honor, we have a simple matter: possession and opportunity. We can proceed without theatrics." The judge finally raised his eyes to the clock, then to the girl. "You are not counsel. You cannot argue. But you may hand that folder to the clerk." A nod. A small permission. A door left on the latch. The clerk took the folder. Inside, a child's drawing with arrows and 6 dots. A jewelry store receipt. A photocopied floor plan with a rectangle shaded in. A printed screenshot of a building log with an 11-minute discrepancy circled in purple crayon. The judge stacked them to the side. "We'll come to these if we must. Prosecution, call your first witness." The matriarch entered like a lesson in posture. Handbag, pearls, an expression polished to a mirror. She swore in without looking at the maid. "Ma'am," the prosecutor said, "tell the court what you saw." "I saw violation," she replied. The painting askew, the safe unlatched, the heirloom missing. Staff were the only people near that corridor. One in particular worked the late shift. Her eyes slid toward the uniform at the defense table, as if gravity had always pulled that way. "Did you confront her?" "I asked for the truth. She refused to give it." The prosecutor smiled at the jury that wasn't there. Habit more than strategy. No further questions. Silence pressed on the maid's side of the room. No lawyer rose. No cross-examination arrived. It is an old feeling to be spoken about instead of spoken to. The judge checked the clock. 17 minutes. Next witness, the prosecutor said. Head of Household Security. A man in a navy blazer took the stand. He described the safe, the camera, the intrusion event at 10:42 p.m. Frame shows a figure in the service corridor, he said. Uniform suggests staff. The judge glanced at the clerk. The clerk glanced at the folder. He didn't move it. Your logs, the judge said, do they include power events? Yes, Your Honor. Were there any that night? A brief flicker, 3 minutes before the timestamp. Backup system handled it. Noted, the judge said, as if pinning a moth to felt. 15 minutes. On the back bench, a young man in an off-the-rack suit leaned forward. Legal aid. He wasn't part of the team that mattered, so no one stopped him from caring. He'd seen a version of the floor plan before. A service mezzanine on a renovation blueprint that didn't exist on the official tour. The kind of space where secrets fit. The child turned slightly, found him with her eyes, and whispered. The lights hummed. He nodded, like he understood a language adults forget. Final witness, the prosecutor said. The officer who recovered the ring. A uniformed officer testified that the ring had been handed over at a private office the next day. Anonymous drop, standard evidence bag, weight noted at 7.2 grams. Catalog says 6.2, the judge said, not asking, just measuring the sound of the numbers. Could be a scale variance, the prosecutor offered. Or a different mount, the legal aid intern murmured to nobody who could help. Remembering the receipt in the folder, rhodium dip plus resize plus proverb 1.0g, 13 minutes. The judge set his pen down. We will recess for 5 minutes, he said. I want prosecution's exhibits in order, and the clerk's packet inventoried. Bailiff, keep everyone in the building. He rose. The gavel tapped once. Small thunder. In the pause, the room breathed for the first time. The billionaire stood, cell phone in his palm, eyes on the maid, as if he'd been caught watching a storm he ordered. He said nothing. That was his way of staying innocent. The matriarch sipped water, perfume and metal and a memory of lilies wrapped around her like a coat. She looked at the child and smiled in a way that asked, Whose side could you possibly be on? The maid stared at her hands, hands that had scrubbed their floors, folded their linens, set their plates at angles that pleased cameras. You can learn a lot about a family by what they expect from the people who touch their things. The legal aid intern slid to the aisle. "Ma'am," he whispered to the maid, respectful, urgent. "May I ask you about a receipt?" He held up the photocopy from the folder. She nodded once. "Where did this come from?" he asked the child. "I found it under the library couch," she said. The night the lights hummed and the house sighed. The intern smiled at the way children do forensics. "And these dots?" He pointed at the 6 circles on her drawing. "Grandma pressed them," the girl said. Then the door opened. "She told me it was our secret game." She looked suddenly worried. "Am I in trouble?" "No," he said softer. "You might be the only person not in trouble." The bell rang. Recess over. 12 minutes. Back on the bench, the judge nodded to the clerk. "Let's see that folder." The clerk handed up the receipt, the drawing, the floor plan, the log printout with the purple circle where 11 minutes went missing. The prosecutor objected on principle. "Unauthenticated, hearsay, from a child." "Relax, counsel," the judge said. "I'm not admitting. I'm noticing." He held the receipt to the light. "Resize, rhodium dip, plus 1 gram." He flipped to the log. "Generators start at 10:28 p.m. Camera reboot at 10:39. Intrusion event timestamp 10:42. Security badge ping 10:41. He glanced up. "We have a clock problem." The matriarch fidgeted, a tiny adjustment at her throat where a necklace wasn't. "Security," the judge said. "Does your safe require both a code and a key?" "Yes. And who holds the key?" "Primary family," the guard said, shifting. "Ma'am carries one." He nodded toward the matriarch before he remembered to be vague. The judge slid the child's drawing closer. 6 dots, arrows to a door, a rectangle shaded where a painting might hang. He didn't smile, but something in his face said, "Thank you" to the stubbornness that had put crayons to paper. 9 minutes. Prosecution, the judge said. "You've asked me to commit this defendant for trial with no defense present, on a chain of timing that doesn't quite agree with itself, and a recovered item that gained weight in the night. You may proceed, but you will proceed carefully." The prosecutor straightened, stung. "Your Honor, the defendant had proximity and motive. She needed money. Staff saw her in the corridor." "Staff also saw the power flicker," the judge replied. "And that corridor camera is notoriously imprecise when it reboots." "Is your case more than a silhouette?" The legal aid intern raised a timid hand from the pew. "Your Honor, if the court would allow—" "You are?" "Legal aid. Observing," he said, flushing. "But I can request a subpoena for the building's elevator log and the private safe room keypad history." "It would take an hour." The prosecutor rolled his eyes. "We're not turning this into a fishing expedition." "We're turning it," the judge said evenly, "into a decision we can live with." He looked at the clock. 7 minutes. A breath moved through the gallery. Even the wood seemed to lean closer. The matriarch crossed her legs. The flash of glove inside her handbag caught the child's eye. Yellow against black leather, the same color the maid wore when she cleaned. The child squeezed the edge of the bench until her knuckles paled. She had learned how to be quiet in the kind of house that mistakes silence for manners. Today, she decided to be loud. She stood. "Your Honor," she said, voice small but steady. "I drew the door because I saw it, and I can show you where the buttons are." The bailiff stepped forward. The judge held up a hand. "Let her finish." "She told me it was our secret," the girl said, nodding toward the matriarch. "But secrets don't feel good when someone else gets in trouble." 5 minutes. The judge exhaled through his nose. "We will not tour a private residence without cause," he said, "but we may consider a limited order for third-party logs." He turned toward the billionaire. "Sir, you look like a man who can make a call. If there's nothing to hide, Get me the keypad history and the generator's raw event file now. The billionaire hesitated. One breath, two, and then reached for his phone as if it weighed 100 pounds. Power learns to move quickly until the day it wants to move slowly. 4 minutes. The maid finally raised her eyes. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I don't know how to argue. I only know I didn't touch what wasn't mine. But if the house has numbers that tell stories, I think they're better at speaking this language than I am." The judge nodded once, the way a craftsman nods at a tool he trusts. "Then let's hear from the numbers." The legal aid intern slid closer to the aisle again, ready to sprint the moment the order landed. The child clutched the empty folder to her chest like armor. The matriarch's smile cracked at the corners. 3 minutes, and somewhere between the gavel and the humming of a far-off generator, a story that had been written for the powerful began to revise itself around a woman in a uniform and a child who refused to be quiet. 2 minutes. A deputy hustled in with a man on speakerphone and a stack of fresh printouts. "Your Honor?" "Building Systems responded," the deputy said, breathless. "Raw generator log, keypad history, elevator telemetry." "Put them on the record," the judge said. The clerk flipped the first sheet. Generator start, 2228, second sheet. Camera reboot complete, 2239, 7 third. Safe room keypad entries, 2229 code accepted. 2243, manual override attempted, access denied, then 2244 code accepted. A fourth sheet. Private elevator. Service stop between L and 1 at 2241. Dorajar 18 seconds. Resume to 1 at 2242, a map corner bore a note. Service mezzanine, renovation layer, non-public. The judge didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied that the numbers had finally joined the conversation. "Security," he said to the witness, "confirm for me. The corridor camera timestamp rides its own clock?" "Yes, Your Honor. It drifts a few minutes after a reboot." "So the 2242 silhouette could be earlier or later?" "Yes." "And the safe cannot open without a code plus a key?" "That's correct." "Who held keys on the night in question?" "Primary family only." The judge slid the keypad sheet toward the prosecutor. 2 accepted codes, 2229 and 2244, both before and after the camera's drift window. "Explain to me how a housekeeper with no key and no code creates this pattern." The prosecutor's confidence dimmed. We don't have that explanation yet." "Then you don't have your remand," the judge said without raising his voice. At the back, the child tightened both hands on the empty folder. The legal aid intern leaned closer. "You did good," he whispered. The matriarch crossed her arms, her handbag creaking softly. The glint of yellow, gloves tucked inside, caught the girl's eye again. She remembered the pinch of those same fingers on her shoulder, and the hush of our secret. 1 minute, the judge said, checking the clock. "Prosecution, you may supplement, briefly, or I will make a provisional ruling." The billionaire finally spoke. "Your Honor, my family will cooperate with any lawful search you deem necessary." The matriarch turned so quickly, her pearls clicked. "Richard," he didn't look at her. He watched the maid the way a man watches a shore after a storm, realizing he's misnamed the danger. "Very well," the judge said. "Here is what we will do. I am denying remand at this time. The defendant is released on her own recognizance. I am issuing a preservation order for all electronic logs, cameras, and access devices. I am granting a limited evidentiary order for the elevator telemetry and safe room keypad history already in hand, and I will entertain a consent search of the private residence for a compartment matching this drawing." He held up the child's page with 6 dots and arrows. "If consent is withheld, counsel may move for a warrant." The prosecutor started to object, then stopped at the look on the judge's face that said, We are saving you from your own file. Bailiff, the judge continued, escort counsel and an evidence technician to the residence. This court will reconvene tomorrow at 9 with whatever is found tonight. The gavel touched wood, a soft, unmistakable promise. A stir moved through the room. It sounded like relief trying to remember how to breathe. The maid exhaled for the first time since morning. Her hands were shaking, but it was a new kind of tremor, the kind that means the ground might hold. The matriarch rose, every inch of her a lesson in refusal. "This circus ends at my door," she said. The judge didn't blink. "It ends at the truth." "Your Honor," the legal aid intern piped up, voice thin but brave. "If the court will allow, I can accompany the technician. I'm already familiar with the renovation schematics. There's a concealed panel in the North Gallery that—" "Go," the judge said, already signing the preservation order. He didn't bother to ask the prosecutor's blessing. The billionaire nodded once to the bailiff. "We'll drive now." As the gallery emptied, the child lingered. She stood on tiptoe to see the bench. "Your Honor," she said, "there's a green button." "Nana always presses that one first." The judge softened a fraction. "Thank you, young lady. Some maps are better in crayon." Outside, the afternoon was the color of polished brass. The convoy of polite cars rolled through a city that didn't know it was about to watch wealth behave like everyone else. The North Gallery smelled faintly of lilies and lemon oil. Evening light pooled on the parquet floor. The painting, an old pastoral with too much sky, hung perfectly level, which is to say, wrong. The child pointed. "It tilts when she's in a hurry." The technician swept a handheld across the wall. "Power under plaster," he said. "Low voltage. There." 6 studs, the intern counted, running his fingers along the molding. 6 dots. He pressed where a child's drawing had drawn arrows. Nothing. He looked at the girl. "Green, then 2, then 5, she whispered, "and she knocks." It felt ridiculous until it didn't. The intern pressed the top left disc, painted to look like a nailhead, then 2 over, then 5 down. He stared at the matriarch. She stared back. Stone. He knocked. Once, then twice. A soft click answered from inside the wall. The panel eased outward from the baseboard to the crown like a secret choosing a new shape. Behind it, a shallow compartment. Velvet box, fresh rhodium sheen, ring cradled like a lie that had learned to sparkle. The room was suddenly full of those very quiet sounds rich houses make when they realize their acoustics are perfect for shame. A breath drawn too quickly, a glove pulled off too slowly. The technician donned evidence mitts and held up the box without touching the ring. The scale from his kit whispered 7.2. He snapped a photo with his body cam, then one with his phone pointed at the matriarch so the chain of custody would include her posture. The bailiff looked to the billionaire. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Power knows when it has run out of synonyms. The matriarch tried for auteur and landed on human. "It was my mother's," she said. He was going to sell it to cover a debt. She flicked her eyes toward the billionaire. Son first, then suspect. "I hid it until he came to his senses. The girl wasn't supposed to. See?" Silence grabbed the room by the throat. The child stepped her, behind the maid's skirt as if discovering, too late that honesty can make adults smaller. "VTDV." Bailiff read the judge's order again, as if to remind the heir whose side paper takes. "Item secured," he said. "We'll log it and return to court." The billionaire's voice found itself at last. "You would let her—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Pride had been heavy all his life. It turned out regret weighed more. He faced the maid instead. "I'm sorry," he said, the 2 least expensive words finally doing the most expensive work. "I should have asked the numbers before I believed the room." The maid didn't nod. "Forgiveness isn't something you do on command." She put a hand on the child's shoulder. "Let's go home," she said, not sure yet where that would be. Night pressed its face to the courthouse windows when they returned. The judge reconvened without ceremony. The evidence tech set the velvet box on the rail, read the weight, the location, the hidden panel, the keypad pattern, the elevator pause, the generator drift. The numbers testified better than people do. The prosecutor cleared his throat. In light of the recovered item and the access logs, the state moves to dismiss without prejudice. "Denied," the judge said. "Dismissed with prejudice as to this defendant." He turned to the maid. "You are free to leave this courtroom with your name intact." A sound escaped the gallery, a small, involuntary cheer quickly swallowed by Wood and Rules. The judge wasn't finished. He addressed the billionaire without rancor. "Sir, your cooperation tonight spared this court a warrant and your household a longer afternoon. See that the rest of your conduct matches the best of it." Then he faced the matriarch. "Ma'am, you are not charged here today. But let me be plain, what happened in that house was not an accident of light. If you misled law enforcement, the law will visit you properly." He tapped the velvet box once with the back of his pen, a tiny gavel. The girl lifted her chin. Her voice reached the microphone even though she wasn't near it. "She didn't mean to hurt my friend," she said. "But secrets hurt anyway." The judge nodded. "Court is adjourned." The gavel found the block. The sound was not loud. It didn't have to be. Some endings are simply a door clicking shut behind a lie. In the aisle, the maid paused. The legal aid intern offered a card with hands that still shook. "If you ever need, I needed today," she said, and tucked the card into a pocket that had been searched and found wanting and was finally allowed to hold something worth keeping. The billionaire and the child stood together, in a way that hadn't happened since the house forgot how to be kind. The matriarch looked smaller than the bench, which is a trick that benches sometimes play. Outside, the night air was cooler than the hallway air because it wasn't pretending. The city moved as if nothing had changed. But for a woman in a uniform and a child with a crayon map, everything had. Outside the courthouse, the city wore its usual face. Traffic that forgot your name. A sky that didn't care who won. But the people who stepped onto the steps had been rearranged. The maid held the rail as if balance had to be relearned. She'd come here ready to lose everything and was leaving with something she didn't have a word for yet. The legal aid intern hovered a step below, relieved and awkward, the way gratitude makes you stand when you don't know where to put your hands. "Will you be okay?" he asked. "I've been okay and worse," she said. "But today will help me remember." The billionaire approached like a man walking across a bridge he should have noticed sooner. He kept his eyes on the maid. "I'm arranging a car to take you home," he said. "And I've asked my office to coordinate with the Public Defender's Fund on your fees." He hesitated. "If you'd allow it." The maid didn't reach for or push away the offer. "Help the ones who won't have a child to speak for them," she said. "Send the money there. I already have what I needed." The child slipped her hand into the maid's. "Come for dinner," she said. "We have sunflowers." The maid almost laughed, which is to say she almost remembered how. News travels differently depending on whose door it knocks. In certain neighborhoods, the story took shape as a moral about humility. In others, it was a whisper about wealth finally learning the grammar of consequence. The better headline would have been simple. Numbers don't care who you are, but headlines like adjectives more than truths, so they called it a miracle, a scandal, a lesson. Back at the mansion, silence didn't wear its old mask. The portraits on the landing watched the family pass with painted neutrality. The North Gallery's panel was shut and sealed and photographed and locked by a code that would be posted on paper a judge could read. The matriarch's door remained closed. Behind it, the sound of someone rearranging their story without witnesses. The housekeeper met the maid at the service entrance with a bowl of lemon water and a towel, as if the dust of court needed its own rinsing. "We kept your locker," she said. "No one touched your things." "I don't know if I work here," the maid replied. "Work if it feels like dignity," the housekeeper said. "Leave if it feels like forgiveness performed." The butler cleared his throat by the pantry. A tiny apology coughed into the air. "There's a pot of soup. It has always been yours when you're hungry." In the kitchen, the child set the table for 3 and placed a single sunflower into a water glass, because vases make some truths look too formal. The billionaire stood with a dish towel draped over his shoulder, as if the cloth could practice service on his behalf. It did not. Service is a verb you have to learn where everyone can see you. They ate quietly. The soup tasted like the first right decision after a series of wrong ones. The billionaire began to say, "I'm sorry again." The maid raised a hand gently. "Let it be a sentence you finish with actions," she said. He nodded. He had said yes to deals worth more than this house and meant less. This was the most expensive agreement he'd ever entered. To change. The district attorney issued a brief notice the next morning. No charges for the maid. Inquiry open regarding false statements made during a property report. The matriarch's counsel called it a misunderstanding. The judge called it a calendar date. A second notice came from another office entirely. The billionaire's company would underwrite a community legal clinic for domestic workers. No ribbon cutting, just rent paid on time, lights that worked, lawyers who answered phones after 5. On the wall above the intake desk, a framed card read, "Some stories need numbers. Some need neighbors. We'll help you find both," reporters called as they do. The billionaire declined. He did not decline the hard stuff. He asked the housekeeper to audit pay scales, and then tripled the training budget, and then shut up so someone else could talk about dignity instead of him. He moved the staff table from the basement to the windowed breakfast room on Sundays. The first Sunday, the matriarch did not come down. By the third, she came, sat, folded her napkin into a precise square, and listened. Listening is what contrition sounds like before it learns new words. The maid interviewed for another job and didn't take it. She tried to fold her life into a brand new place and found it wouldn't fit without the child's drawings and the housekeeper's way of setting spoons and the way the butler cleared his throat at apologies. So she came back, on new terms, with a contract that spelled the difference between service and servitude. The billionaire read it twice, signed once, and understood a little more about the equality you put on paper, because it has been too long off it. The first day back, the child showed the maid a notebook with 6 circles drawn on the first page. She had titled it, "Things the House Forgot." Page 2 was a sketch of the library couch, where small paper receipts sometimes hide under cushions like shy truths. Page 3 was a sunflower. Page 4 was blank for future use. "Can we write in it together?" the girl asked. "Yes," the maid said, "but we'll keep a second copy in the pantry, where lies go to get nervous." At the courthouse, the judge's clerk filed the order that would close the circle the law could draw. The judge returned to the next case. Justice is both a ceremony and a factory. It makes things and fixes things, and sometimes reveals that the best part of the machine is a child who walks in without permission. The legal aid intern returned to a desk without a window and a stack of files that didn't care. He'd just helped rearrange someone's future. He took his lunch on the steps anyway, in the sun he'd earned by staying late for strangers. A message blinked on his phone from an unknown number. "Thank you for not being afraid of crayons." He smiled without answering. "Some thanks you keep like a coin in your pocket to touch when the elevator stops between floors, and you need to remember you are useful." Weeks passed. The matriarch's hearing was brief, then delayed, then scheduled again. The law does not rush for the people who taught it to move slowly. In the meantime, she began walking the garden in the early hours before anyone else rose, picking dead leaves off roses with bare fingers, as if the pain of thorns were a language she'd decided to practice. One morning, She stood by the north gallery wall for a long time, not touching it, just memorizing the space where power used to pretend to be safety. When she returned to the house, she paused at the kitchen door and watched the maid teach the child how to cut sunflowers for the table without losing too much stem. She didn't enter. She didn't turn away. She learned. The billionaire called the maid into the study. He did it at noon, in light, with the door open, because secrets had lost their lease. On the desk lay a folder, the kind that used to frighten her. This one held a written apology and a reparations agreement. Back pay for suspended weeks, damages for legal costs, a donation in her name to the clinic, and a clause requiring annual audits of household labor conditions by a third party the maid would choose. He didn't explain it. He didn't perform it. He slid a pen across the desk and waited like a student who hoped he'd studied the right chapters. She read. Then she signed. When she left the room, she did not feel like a victory. She felt like a person. That is harder and better. The child had one last surprise the court didn't need. She took the maid to the library and pulled a shoebox from behind the lowest shelf. Inside were 3 things. A key drawn in crayon, a list titled Words We Say When We Are Brave, and a photograph the housekeeper had found and saved. Years old, of the maid holding a toddler at a church picnic, both of them laughing at something off camera. Loss is a museum and grief a curator. Some days they close early, so love can visit alone. Will you help me add to the list? The girl asked. Which word first? The maid said. Today, the girl decided. Let's add today. They wrote it together, the maid's script steady, the child's letters generous. The page looked like a promise learning how to spell itself. People asked, when the house started letting neighbors in on Sundays, how the story ended. The staff told them it didn't. Endings are for things you can pack away. This had become a method of checking logs before pointing fingers, of moving tables before moving mouths, of teaching children that secrets are heavy and truth travels better in daylight. They built something small that turned out to be large, a binder on the pantry shelf labeled If We Forget. Inside were instructions for what to do if the power flickers, who to call if the camera freezes, how to map truth when someone insists on darkness, and a list of names of people to feed first when the soup runs low. On the last page, the child pasted a sunflower petal and wrote, Some things face the light because they are brave. Some because they learn to be. Both count. The maid closed the binder and set it back on the shelf. Then she stepped into the afternoon with a basket for laundry and a map in her head of a house that used to feel like a test and now felt like work you could be proud of. The billionaire passed her in the hall and didn't lower his eyes. He said good afternoon like a person does to another person. It landed softly. She nodded and kept walking. In the doorway to the garden, the matriarch paused and looked at the maid and the child and the sunflower in a jar on the table. A sentence formed and failed and formed again. Thank you, she said at last, to the room or the season or the story. The maid didn't answer. Gratitude doesn't need an audience every time it breathes. She adjusted the sunflower so it wouldn't lean too close, too.